CBS News national security correspondent David Martin is joining us now from the Pentagon to sort of give us some information about what's going on here. David, what can you tell us about this latest missile launch? Should our allies like South Korea and Japan, should they be worried?
Well, what you're talking about here is 3 short-range ballistic missiles. They have a range that is great enough to reach targets in South Korea. So obviously, South Korea would have reason to be concerned about these tests, because it means that North Korea is continuing to develop the capability to attack South Korea. At a minimum, what's happening here is that Kim Jong-un is signaling his displeasure at South Korea for having resumed conducting military exercises with the United States. They're being done at a much lower profile than they used to be, but they are still being conducted. And he has said publicly, and his news outlets have said publicly, that they take that as bad faith. So that's one thing that's certainly going on here. Whether or not he is also trying to signal to the Trump administration that he is frustrated at the lack of progress in negotiations over denuclearization, I think you have to say that he probably is trying to send that message as well. But if you read the North Korean rhetoric, right now it's not very threatening. It calls its policy right now one of maximum patience, which I'm sure is intended to play off the Trump administration's policy of maximum pressure. And it says that the denuclearization talks have reached an impasse, which I think is a pretty accurate description of what's going on. But impasse is not a very cataclysmic term. You can always get past an impasse. So I kind of liken it to Kim Jong-un kind of drumming his fingers on the table, showing he's getting a little impatient, but he's not ready to walk away from the table yet.
Yeah, and that's a great point to make, David. But it is true that the president has used this barometer of measuring the number of missile tests that the North Koreans have fired since the closeness that he and Kim Jong-un, according to the president's words, have developed. He said that they fell in love, right? That's as close as you can, I guess, get to another human being. And so I wonder now, because of that, because the president has always felt that his personal relationship with world leaders is enough, or in some cases at least a good starting point to strengthening bonds and strengthening relationships and coming to a common understanding, what Pentagon officials are telling you about the true motives behind North Korea. The reality is political and geopolitical watchers say that they want sanctions relief. And if that means that they sit at a dinner table with all the pomp and circumstance with the president of the United States, they're willing to do that. But at the end of the day, they want to see those sanctions removed. Question is, do Pentagon officials feel that that's a possibility?
Well, first place, I don't know of a single official who really thinks that North Korea is going to give up all of its nuclear weapons. And of course, that is the American demand, not just part of your nuclear infrastructure, all of your nuclear weapons, beginning with giving us a full accounting of everything you've got. And once you do that, but only after you've done that, will the U.S. lift these sanctions, which is the principal thing that North Korea is trying to get relief from. Those are pretty irreconcilable demands. And I think most Pentagon officials have thought this was how it was going to go. There was not going to be an agreement, and they would resume some sort of testing. And the only question here is, will North Korea start testing the longer range systems that fly over Japan and are capable of threatening the U.S. Bases in places like Guam, or even of reaching the United States, in which case Kim Jong-un would have abandoned his pledge that he made not to test these intermediate and long-range systems. Once that happens, we're back to where we started at the beginning of the Trump administration. And you sort of have to look at what's been happening lately and think that we may be at the start of that process of more and more tests at longer and longer ranges.
Let's not go back to Little Rocket Man and all that other stuff, but just a quick question, David. I know that earlier in the year, those joint military exercises between South Korea and the U.S. military were suspended. What's the status? Is that still in suspension? And has the U.S. scaled back in any other way in terms of their military presence there?
Well, they've scaled back the visibility of these exercises. You know, these used to be conducted with great fanfare. They still conducted those exercises this spring. They called them something else, and they didn't make them as visible, and they tried not to make them as threatening to North Korea as they used to be, because the point of those exercises was twofold. One, to train the troops, but two, to send a signal to North Korea, and the more visible you are, the louder the signal. So they knocked off the sending a signal part, but they're continuing with the training. And just yesterday, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was testifying on Capitol Hill, and he said he is confident that this new system of exercises is not going to result in any decrease in the readiness of U.S. forces in South Korea. So, you know, the North Koreans are looking at this, and they're sophisticated enough to know a real military exercise when they see one, and they see that, okay, it's a lot quieter than it used to be, but they're still practicing military maneuvers with the South Koreans.
David Martin, I know you're going to keep an eye on this, and you'll have a report later tonight on the Evening News. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Sure thing.